Hi, I'm Amira, and welcome to the channel. Today we're embarking on a journey, but instead of traversing continents or oceans, we're going to travel through time by looking at the small metallic objects that have passed through millions of hands, jingled in countless pockets, and witnessed the entire story of a nation. I'm talking, of course, about coins. American coins. These aren't just bits of metal, they are miniature monuments, artifacts of economic policy, and reflections of cultural values. They are, in a very real sense, history that you can hold. Our exploration will take us from a time when colonists were using a chaotic jumble of foreign currency to the sleek, modern coins we use today, without a second thought. We'll see how a fledgling nation struggled to create its own monetary identity, how that identity was shaped by wars, gold rushes, and political debates, and how the faces and symbols on our coinage have evolved to reflect a more inclusive and complex American story. We'll discover how a Spanish coin gave us common slang, and how a simple motto became a national standard. So grab your change jar and get ready to look at those pennies, nickels, and dimes in a whole new light. We're going to uncover the epic tales behind the humble coins that have built, documented, and defined the United States. It's a story of art, industry, politics, and people. A story of America, one coin at a time. Let's get started. So, it's the 1600s, you're a colonist in, say, Massachusetts, and you want to buy a loaf of bread. What do you pay with? Well, it's complicated. The British colonies in North America didn't have their own official currency system. They were, after all, part of the British Empire, which operated on a policy of mercantilism. The idea was that colonies existed to enrich the mother country, so hard currency, gold and silver, was meant to flow to England, not hang around in the Americas. This created a chronic shortage of official British money, like pounds, shillings, and pence. People had to get creative. Commerce didn't just stop because of a lack of British coins. Instead, the colonies became a melting pot of global currencies. A merchant in Boston or Charleston might have a cash box filled with Dutch guilders, French livre, and Portuguese joes. But the undisputed king of colonial currency, the most trusted and widely circulated coin, was the Spanish silver dollar, also known as the peso de ocho, or piece of 8. It was a hefty, reliable silver coin minted in vast quantities from the rich mines of Spanish America. This Spanish dollar was so ubiquitous that it became the de facto standard. Its consistency in weight and purity made it the benchmark against which other currencies were valued. And here's a fantastic little linguistic artifact for you. The Spanish dollar was often physically cut into smaller pieces to make change. A whole dollar was 8 reales, so if you cut it into 8 wedge-shaped bits, each bit was worth 1 real. If a haircut cost $0.25, you'd pay with 2 of those bits. Hence the enduring American slang 2 bits for a quarter. It's a direct echo from a time when we literally chopped up Spanish silver to go about our day. But relying on foreign money wasn't ideal. It was confusing, and it made the colonies dependent on other empires' economies. Some colonies decided to take matters into their own hands. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was particularly bold. In 1652, defying English authority, it established its own mint and began producing silver coins. The most famous of these was the pine tree shilling. It was a simple, some might say crude, silver coin stamped with a pine tree, a symbol of New England resilience. This act was, in a way, a small declaration of economic independence, a full century before the political one. The English crown was not pleased, viewing it as an overreach of colonial authority. To get around this, the Massachusetts Mint famously kept stamping the date 1652 on all its coins for 30 years, pretending they were all made in that first year before the king could really object. It was a clever, slightly rebellious solution to a very real problem, and it shows that long before 1776, the colonists were already thinking about how to manage their own affairs, starting with the money in their pockets. Fast forward to 1776. The Declaration of Independence is signed, and the United States is, at least on paper, a new nation. But winning a war and building a country are two very different things, and one of the immediate challenges was, once again, money. The Continental Congress, trying to fund a revolution, resorted to printing massive amounts of paper money known as continentals. But because this currency wasn't backed by gold or silver, it quickly lost its value due to hyperinflation. The phrase "not worth a continental" became a bitter summary of this failed economic experiment. So even after independence, the young nation found itself in a familiar bind. People went right back to using the hodgepodge of foreign coins they knew and trusted, especially those reliable Spanish dollars. The United States had political sovereignty, but it lacked monetary sovereignty. It was a bit like throwing a great party but having to ask your neighbors to provide all the plates and cups. It was functional, but not exactly a sign of a strong, independent household. The Articles of Confederation gave Congress the power to coin money, but it lacked the real authority and resources to create a unified national system. The first major step toward a truly American coin came in 1787, the same year the Constitution was being drafted. This was the Fugio cent. While not minted by a federal U.S. mint, that didn't exist yet, it was the first coin officially authorized by the Congress of the Confederation. It was contracted out to private minters, but it was designed with a uniquely American, and frankly quite brilliant set of symbols. It was a copper cent, intended to be the workhorse coin for everyday transactions. On one side it featured a sun and a sundial with the Latin word fugio, meaning I fly, a reminder that time flies, so you should be productive. Below this was the wonderfully direct and pragmatic advice, mind your business. Now this wasn't just telling people to stay out of your affairs. In the 18th century sense, business meant your work, your trade, your affairs. It was an encouragement toward industry and personal responsibility, a very Franklin-esque sentiment. Benjamin Franklin himself is often credited with suggesting this design. On the other side of the Fugio cent you find a chain of 13 interlocking rings, each representing one of the original states. At the center are the words, "We are one." This was a powerful statement of national unity in a time of deep division and uncertainty. The Fugio cent perfectly encapsulates the spirit of the era, a call for individual diligence, mind your business, combined with a plea for collective strength, we are one. It was a coin that was both a piece of currency and a piece of political philosophy, a small copper disc trying to hold a fragile new republic together. The Fugio cent was a great start, but it was a temporary solution. The new Constitution, ratified in 1788, gave Congress the sole power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin. This was a critical step. The founders, especially Alexander Hamilton, understood that a nation's strength and stability were directly linked to its control over its own currency. You couldn't be a first-rate power if you were still using second-hand Spanish money. This led to one of the landmark pieces of early American legislation, the Coinage Act of 1792. This act was monumental. It did three major things. First, it established the United States Mint. A site was chosen in Philadelphia, which was then the nation's capital, and it became the very first federal building erected under the new Constitution. Second, the act established the U.S. dollar as the country's standard unit of money, pegging its value to the familiar Spanish milled dollar. Third, and this would have huge consequences for the next century, it established a bimetallic standard. This meant that the value of the dollar was defined in terms of both gold and silver, at a specific ratio of 15 units of silver to 1 unit of gold. The idea behind bimetallism was to increase the amount of specie, hard money, in circulation by using both metals. However, it created a persistent problem. The market values of gold and silver were always fluctuating. If the official mint ratio didn't match the market ratio, one metal would become undervalued and the other overvalued. People would then hoard the undervalued metal or sell it abroad for a profit, causing it to disappear from circulation. This issue would plague American monetary policy for decades. With the mint established and the rules set, it was time to actually make some coins. According to legend, the very first coins struck by the new U.S. Mint were made in 1792, from silverware donated by none other than George and Martha Washington themselves. These were the half-dismes, an early spelling of dime. While these were more of a pattern or test coin, they were a symbolic start. The first coins intended for mass circulation began to appear in 1793, starting with the copper half-cent and the big, beautiful large cent. These first official coins were a declaration to the world. They featured a design that was deliberately anti-monarchical. Instead of a king or queen, the obverse showed a representation of liberty, often depicted with wild, untamed flowing hair. This flowing hair design was meant to symbolize the freedom of the new republic. In 1794, silver coins joined the coppers, including the half-dime, half-dollar, and the flagship silver coin, the flowing hair dollar. The United States finally had its own unified official currency. The grand experiment had begun. Now that the United States Mint was up and running, The early decades were really a period of refinement and evolution. The initial coin designs, while symbolically potent, were not universally loved. The first flowing hair Liberty, for instance, was criticized by some as looking, well, kind of frightened or wild. The goal was to find a design that conveyed dignity, strength, and, the ideals of the Republic. So, the face of American money began to change, though the central theme, liberty, remained constant. This was a direct and conscious rejection of the European tradition of putting the monarch's portrait on coins. The first major redesign happened in 1795, shifting from the flowing hair type to the draped bust design. This new portrayal of liberty was more classical and stately, often said to be based on a drawing by the famous artist Gilbert Stuart. She now had a ribbon in her neatly tied hair and a drape over her bust, giving her a more formal Greco-Roman appearance. This really connected the young American Republic to the ancient democracies of Greece and Rome, which was a pretty popular theme at the time. The reverse of the silver coins also changed. They initially featured a rather scrawny-looking eagle, which was soon replaced by a more majestic heraldic eagle, similar to the one on the Great Seal of the United States. While copper and silver coins were circulating, the Coinage Act had also authorized gold coins. These began to appear in 1795. There were 3 denominations: the quarter eagle, worth $2.50, the half eagle, worth $5, and the eagle, worth $10. Notice the naming convention: no dollar designation, just majestic birds. These gold coins were the heavyweights of the monetary system, used for large transactions, bank reserves, and international trade. They were not the coins of the common person, but of merchants, bankers, and the wealthy. The design of these early gold coins also evolved. They started with a capped bust design, where liberty wears a distinctive Phrygian cap, an ancient symbol of freedom and emancipation. This capped bust motif would eventually be adapted for silver coins as well, replacing the draped bust design in the early 1800s. This period from the 1790s to the 1830s is often called the capped bust era by numismatists. The designs were still made with fairly primitive equipment, meaning each die was hand-engraved, leading to many minor variations that collectors love to hunt for today. So for the first few decades of the 19th century, the coins in an American's pocket would have featured these different versions of Lady Liberty: a copper large cent for small purchases, a silver-capped bust dime, or $half for larger ones, and if you were very fortunate, a gold eagle in your safe. Each coin was a small piece of federal art, a tangible representation of the nation's identity, an identity that was still being forged, just like the metal blanks that were struck into money at the Philadelphia Mint. The 1830s marked a major turning point for the United States Mint, bringing it from an almost craft-based workshop into the industrial age. The big innovation was the introduction of steam-powered coining presses in 1836. Before this, coins were struck one at a time using human or animal-powered screw presses. It was slow and laborious, and the quality could be, well, pretty inconsistent. The new steam presses were revolutionary. They were faster, more powerful, and produced coins of a much higher and more uniform quality, with sharper details and perfectly round edges. This technological leap coincided with a design overhaul. The capped bust designs were phased out in favor of the new seated Liberty motif, which would dominate American silver coinage for more than 50 years. This design depicted Liberty seated on a rock, holding a shield and a pole with a Liberty cap. It was a more formal, less personal depiction, but it was standardized across all silver denominations, from the half dime to the dollar, creating a visually unified currency system for the first time. This was the look of American money for generations. Then, in 1848, something happened that would dramatically reshape America's economy, and its coinage gold was discovered in California. The ensuing gold rush unleashed a torrent of the yellow metal into the United States economy. The government needed a way to convert all this new bullion into money. The existing gold coins, with the $10 eagle as the largest, were too small for handling the massive quantities of gold flowing from the West. So Congress authorized 2 new denominations. The first was the tiny gold dollar, introduced in 1849. It was the smallest U.S. coin ever produced, making it easy to lose but useful for everyday transactions. At the other end of the spectrum was its big brother, the magnificent $20 gold piece, or double eagle, also introduced in 1849. This hefty coin contained nearly a full ounce of gold and became the workhorse of international trade and large-scale finance. the sheer amount of gold available fundamentally altered the nation's wealth. This era also saw the final demonetization of foreign coins. For decades, Spanish, Mexican, and other silver coins had continued to circulate alongside United States money. But by the 1850s, the U.S. Mint was finally producing enough domestic currency to meet the nation's needs. The Coinage Act of 1857 officially stripped foreign coins of their legal tender status. After more than 200 years, the American monetary system was finally self-sufficient. As a final symbolic change, the bulky, expensive-to-produce large cent was retired that same year, replaced by the smaller, more modern Flying Eagle cent, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. The 1860s plunged the United States into its darkest hour, the Civil War. And wars have a profound effect on a nation's money. As uncertainty swept the country both in the Union and the Confederacy, people began to hoard hard currency, gold and silver coins. This is a classic response to crisis. When you don't trust the government or the future, you trust tangible assets. This widespread hoarding caused coins to vanish from circulation almost overnight, leading to a severe shortage and making everyday commerce nearly impossible. How do you buy a newspaper or a pound of flour when there are no small coins to make change? People and businesses improvised. One solution was the explosion of private tokens. Local merchants, transit companies, and others began issuing their own small, coin-like tokens, usually made of copper or brass. They were often stamped with an advertisement for the business and a promise that they were good for 1 cent or good for a glass of soda. It was a return to a decentralized, chaotic system, born of necessity. The federal government also had to find a solution. Its answer was one of the most curious forms of money in U.S. history: postage currency and later, fractional currency. The government essentially started printing tiny paper notes in denominations like 5, 10, 25, and 50 cents, some of which even had images of postage stamps on them. People called this shin plaster, and while it was flimsy and easily damaged, it filled the void left by the missing coins and kept the economy moving. This period also saw the massive issuance of paper greenbacks to fund the war effort, fundamentally shifting the nation towards paper money. Amidst this monetary chaos, a significant and lasting change was made to American coinage. In 1864, with the war still raging, the United States introduced a new denomination, the 2-cent piece. This coin is historically important for two reasons. First, it was created partly to help with the coin shortage, but second, and more importantly, it was the very first U.S. coin to bear the motto, "In God We Trust." The idea was promoted by religious leaders who wanted to acknowledge God on the nation's currency during the turmoil of the war. Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase agreed, and the motto made its debut. The phrase resonated with the public, and in 1865, Congress passed legislation to allow the motto on all gold and silver coins. While it didn't appear on all denominations immediately, its introduction on the humble 2-cent piece marked a pivotal moment. It reflected a desire to express national faith and identity during a time of extreme crisis. The Civil War, therefore, not only reshaped the nation's soul but also left a permanent inscription on its money, a legacy that continues to this day. The decades following the Civil War, often called the Gilded Age, were a time of massive industrial growth, westward expansion, and some really intense political debate. And right at the center of many of those debates was money itself, specifically the battle between silver and gold. The bimetallic system established in 1792 had always been pretty unstable. And after those massive silver discoveries in the West, like the Comstock lode in Nevada, the issue really came to a head. The market price of silver plummeted, throwing the official 15-to-1 ratio completely out of whack. In 1873, Congress passed a Coinage Act that effectively ended the minting of silver dollars for circulation, moving the country toward a de facto gold standard. This became known to silver supporters as the Crime of '73. Farmers, miners, and debtors wanted more money in circulation, which minting lots of silver would accomplish, leading to inflation and making their debts easier to pay. Bankers, creditors, and industrialists, on the other hand, favored the sound money of the gold standard, which would keep the dollar's value stable. This silver versus gold debate became one of the defining political issues of the late 19th century. in response to political pressure from silver-producing states and populist movements, Congress passed the Bland-Allison Act in 1878. This act required the U.S. Treasury to purchase millions of dollars worth of silver each month and coin it into silver dollars. This brings us to, perhaps the most iconic American coin of the era, the Morgan silver dollar. Named after its designer, George T. Morgan, this large, heavy silver dollar became the symbol of the American West, jingling in the pockets of cowboys, miners, and gamblers. The Morgan dollar's design was a departure from the classical seated Liberty. It featured a powerful, distinctly American-looking profile of Lady Liberty on the obverse and a strong, proud eagle on the reverse. Between 1878 and 1904, and then again for one last time in 1921, hundreds of millions of these coins were minted. Many were never even circulated, instead sitting in treasury vaults in massive canvas bags. They were in many ways a political coin, a product of the fierce struggle over the nation's monetary soul. While the Morgan dollar stole the spotlight, other denominations continued to be produced, many still using variations of the long-running seated Liberty design. However, by the 1890s there was a push for new aesthetics. This led to the introduction of the Liberty head or barber coinage, designed by chief engraver Charles E. Barber. This new series included a dime, a quarter, and a $half, all sharing a uniform, classical head of Liberty. This design would carry American silver coinage into the dawn of the 20th century, closing out a gilded age defined by industrial might and a titanic battle over silver and gold. At the turn of the 20th century, America was buzzing with new energy, and with that came a new president who thought the nation's coins were, well, just plain uninspired. President Theodore Roosevelt, never one to mince words, famously complained that American coins were of atrocious hideousness. He wanted more than just currency. He wanted works of art, symbols that would reflect America's growing place on the world stage. Roosevelt dreamed of coins as beautiful and impressive as those of ancient Greece, and he knew exactly who could make that happen. He reached out personally to Augustus St. Gaudens, the most celebrated sculptor in the country, to spark this numismatic renaissance. Their partnership, carried out through a series of passionate letters, set out to completely overhaul American coinage. St. Gaudens' first masterpieces were for the gold coins, and in 1907, he revealed his breathtaking designs for the $10 eagle and the $20 double eagle. The double eagle especially is often called the most beautiful coin ever minted by the United States. It features a powerful, striding Liberty on one side and a soaring eagle on the other. The earliest versions were struck in ultra-high relief, just as Roosevelt wanted, resulting in a coin with incredible depth and detail. But, as it turned out, these coins were tough to produce in large numbers and didn't stack well, so the design was soon modified for everyday use. Even so, the artistry remained a triumph. Sadly, St. Gaudens passed away before he could redesign the rest of the denominations, but his work set a new standard and inspired a wave of creativity at the Mint. Over the next decade, we saw a whole series of beloved designs. In 1909, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, the Lincoln cent was introduced, the very first time a real person, not an allegorical figure, appeared on a circulating U.S. coin. In 1913, the Buffalo nickel debuted, with its striking images of a Native American chief and a powerful bison. And in 1916, collectors got the so-called Mercury dime, actually a winged Liberty head, and the beautiful standing Liberty quarter. This era, from about 1907 into the early 1930s, really stands as the artistic peak of American coinage. But all good things come to an end. The Great Depression changed everything. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the country off the gold standard to fight the economic crisis, and Americans were ordered to turn in their gold coins and bullion. The Mint stopped making gold coins for circulation, effectively ending the era of St. Gaudens masterpieces and the idea of everyday gold coins. The artistry of American coins had reached its height just as the metal that gave them value was pulled from the public's hands. After World War II, the United States entered a new age of prosperity and global leadership, but honestly, its coinage became more standardized and, well, a bit less adventurous than in earlier decades. The trend that started with the Lincoln cent, honoring real historical figures instead of allegorical ones, became the new normal. In 1932, the Washington quarter was introduced for his bicentennial. Then, in 1938, the Jefferson nickel replaced the Buffalo nickel. And in 1946, the Roosevelt dime took the place of the Mercury dime, honoring the late president. These designs, Lincoln, Jefferson, Washington, and later Franklin on the half dollar, became the familiar faces in everyone's change for generations of baby boomers. They were dignified and respectful, but, they just didn't have the same artistic flair as the coins from the St. Gaudens or Buffalo nickel era. The coins of the mid-20th century were reliable and practical, reflecting a nation focused more on stability than on bold artistic statements. But the biggest change in coinage after the war wasn't about design, it was about metal. For most of U.S. history, dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollars were made of 90% silver, giving them real intrinsic value. But by the early 1960s, industrial demand for silver was skyrocketing and the price of silver was climbing fast. Eventually, the silver in a quarter was worth more than 25 cents, which, as you can guess, caused a huge problem. People started hoarding silver coins and melting them down for their metal value. Just like during the Civil War, coins began to disappear from circulation, threatening to bring business to a halt. The government had to step in. The answer was the Coinage Act of 1965, which completely changed the makeup of our everyday coins. Silver was removed from dimes and quarters, replaced by a clad sandwich of copper and nickel. The half-dollar's silver content was cut to 40%, then eliminated entirely a few years later. That was the end of an era. For the first time since the 1790s, circulating American coins had no precious metal value. They became purely fiat money, their value backed only by the government, not by the metal inside. While the Lincoln cent and Jefferson nickel designs have hung around for decades with just a few tweaks, the very substance of our money was fundamentally changed, marking the final shift from the coins of our ancestors to the modern, utilitarian tokens we use today. For decades after 1965, American coinage stayed pretty much the same. The same familiar faces showed up in our change year after year. But as the 20th century wrapped up, the US Mint had a fresh idea. What if coins could help teach history and geography, and maybe even get people excited about collecting again? That's how one of the most successful numismatic programs ever was born, the 50 State Quarters program, which kicked off in 1999. The idea was simple, but really clever. Washington's portrait would stay on the front, but the back of the quarter would feature a new design for each of the 50 states, released in the order they joined the Union. Suddenly, everyone was checking their change. The program became a cultural phenomenon. An estimated 140 million Americans started collecting, searching for their state's quarter or trying to build a complete set. It was a huge hit, breathing new life into the hobby and connecting people to the states in a whole new way. The success of the state quarters set the stage for more. There were new series for the District of Columbia and U.S. territories, and then the America the Beautiful Quarters program, which ran from 2010 to 2021, honoring a national park or historic site in each state and territory. Around the same time, the Presidential Dollar Coin program from 2007 to 2016 tried to do for presidents what the quarters did for states, but it never quite caught on with the public, and the coins ended up being made just for collectors. More recently, the Mint has kept this trend going with commemorative circulating coins. The latest big program is the American Women Quarters, which started in 2022 and features prominent women from American history on the back of the quarter like Maya Angelou, Sally Ride, and Wilma Mankiller. This is a pretty big step toward more diversity and representation on our coins, reflecting a changing America. And for collectors, the Mint has also looked back, like in 2021 when they reissued modern versions of the Morgan and Peace silver dollars to mark the 100th anniversary of the transition between those two coins, which sent collectors into a frenzy. These recent programs show that while our everyday coins, the Lincoln cent, Jefferson nickel, Roosevelt dime, and Washington quarter, are still the backbone of our money, there's a renewed appreciation for using coins as little canvases for storytelling, celebrating history, and reflecting who we are as a nation today. So, from the Spanish piece of 8 all the way to the American women quarters, the journey of American coinage is really a story of evolution. It's about a country finding its economic footing, honoring its heroes, fighting political battles, and trying to capture its ideals on these small, sturdy objects that pass through all our hands. Next time you get some change, just take a second to look at it. You're not just holding money. You're holding a little piece of history, a chapter in a story that's still unfolding. And honestly, there's some fascinating trivia along the way. For example, the most valuable coin in the world is a US coin, the 1933 St. Gaudens Double Eagle. Most of those were melted down when the US left the gold standard, but a few survived and one sold for nearly $19 million. The rarest? Many would say the 1913 Liberty Head nickel. Only 5 are known to exist, and their origin is still a mystery. And while the new quarters celebrate American women, the very first woman on a circulating US coin was Susan B. Anthony, on the dollar coin in 1979. These coins are more than just currency. They're cultural touchstones, little monuments we carry around every day. They remind us where we've been, and with every new design give us a hint of where we might be going. So, what's your favorite coin? Do you have a cool coin fact or a memory tied to a specific design? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.